Cheers.
As you know, one of Susan Lee's first moves as opposition leader was dumping 4 senior talented women from Shadow Cabinet in favour of either inexperienced replacements or factional allies. And there are now fewer women in Susan Lee's Shadow Cabinet than there were under Peter Dutton, the same number as under Scott Morrison. This is despite her previous public demand for 50-50 quotas for men and women. Now, I've interviewed Ted O'Brien. He's going to be on the show later tonight, but here's part of what he had to say when I asked him about this issue. And isn't it a bad sign that you needed, as Deputy Leader, to make those calls on your second day after the Shadow Ministry was announced?
Oh, Shari, I suppose partly maybe as a Deputy Leader, but in truth, it's just about relationships and speaking to colleagues.
That's about Ted O'Brien trying to clean up the mess by ringing around to calm the waters. Now, among those dumped from Shadow Cabinet is Tasmanian Senator Claire Chandler. She was previously the Shadow Minister for the Arts, Government Services and Sciences, and Claire joins me on the show now. Claire, thank you very much for your time. You achieved a lot during your time in Shadow Cabinet. How disappointed have you been since you were told the news last week?
Oh, thank you, first of all, for having me on the show, Shari. And look, sure, I was certainly disappointed on Wednesday when I received the news that I wouldn't be back around the Shadow Cabinet table. But look, politics is a game of ups and downs, as I think a few of my colleagues have said over the last few days. And I'm only 35. I've just been re-elected to the Senate for another 6 years, and I'm very hopeful that I'll have the opportunity at some point again to serve around the Shadow Cabinet table. But for the next little while, I'm very much looking forward to having the freedom to speak my mind on the backbench about the issues that I care about and the issues that Tasmanians and Australians care about.
Yeah, and I'm sure you will speak your mind here on Sky News as well to our audience. Now, I reported on the show on Thursday night that Susan Lee ghosted Jane Hume. She refused to take her phone calls or text messages. And I understand that you also contacted the new Liberal leader saying that you'd be happy to serve in Shadow Cabinet, but you didn't hear back. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Can you expand on that a bit more? What did you say when you approached us saying that you would be happy to serve?
Well, look, particularly given I had previously been in a Shadow Cabinet role, like you said at the outset, with the Shadow Ministerial responsibilities for government services and science and the arts, digital economy, I would have been very happy to continue at that level. And, you know, you can't... You don't always get things if you don't ask for them, so I thought it was appropriate to make sure that the new leader knew that I was still keen to continue in that capacity.
But you never heard back?
No.
You voted for Angus Taylor in the leadership ballot, I understand, and you did go public saying that you intended to vote for him. Do you think that had a role to play?
I did.
Do you think that had a role to play in why you were demoted?
Look, it may well have done, Shari. At the end of the day, that's probably a question for the opposition leader to answer rather than me. But look, like I say, politics is a non-linear career path, and sometimes you experience disappointments and you pick yourself up and you dust yourself off and you get on with the task at hand. And there is no doubt that everyone in our Liberal Party room, whether you are in Shadow Cabinet, in the Shadow Ministry, or indeed on the backbenches I now am, we have a huge task ahead of us to make sure that we are in the best possible position to win the election in 3 years' time. There is a lot of policy work that needs to be done, and I'm sure all of my colleagues and I will be putting our shoulder to the wheel to make sure that that happens.
Well, on that front, you know, what direction do you think the party needs to move in to appeal to more Australians?
Well, look, I don't think it's a question of us going further to the left or further to the right, although I'll note that a few of my colleagues have had views on what direction we need to go in, and indeed a few in the media and in the political commentariat have had their views. At the end of the day, the values of the Liberal Party that Robert Menzies articulated are absolutely timeless, but here and now in 2025, we need to figure out a way to take those values, to apply them to the problems that Australians are having and come up with real and tangible solutions in accordance with those values, and then explain what those solutions are to the Australian people. And I look back on, our last election result. I don't think we talked enough to Australians about the solutions that we were offering. And I think, frankly, particularly in some policy areas, we needed to be developing more and better solutions. And look, I think the Liberal Party has had a tough time in recent years. You look back to the pandemic, and I know that was 5 years ago, but economically, the way that challenged our very ethos as a party was massive. We were putting a great deal of public money out the door. We had to create big government by necessity of the circumstances that we found ourselves in. Now is the time that we have to recentre ourselves and particularly, I think, recraft that economic narrative and talk to Australians about why small government is better for them and why big government is just going to get in the way, is going to make their lives harder, not make their lives easier. That's a really important message that I think we need to focus on for the next 3 years, because I'm not sure that Australians necessarily understand the merits of those values now, because, frankly, I don't think we've been good enough at talking about them.
No, you're completely right. And when you look at the budget position now, it's in such a horrific position, and the spending's going out the door. The Albanese government's approach is to increase taxes. They're going to look for other areas they can raise taxes. But the political challenge, Claire, is that when the coalition said, well, we need to embark on budget repair, we need to cut spending, that was weaponised against the coalition. So, that's the difficulty, isn't it? Trying to sell the argument that there does need to be spending cuts.
Oh, look, that's always going to be a challenge. But like I say, Shari, we have 3 years now where we have to get back to basics in terms of how we're communicating with Australians, what our values are, what the problems are that they're facing, and how we'll use those values to solve those problems. And there's a lot of work that we need to do to get back into a position where we can win elections. But like I say, I think we can do it. It's going to be an awful lot of hard work, and we have a very short time to do it. So, frankly, I think it's almost at the point where we need to stop talking about what the problems are and start looking at some solutions. And I'm sure that policy work is underway by all of my colleagues in the Shadow Ministry.